This is the second tutorial in a series of tutorials about Google Web Toolkit. As you may remember, in the previous tutorial I have shown how to install Java and how to install the Eclipse integrated development environment. I may also have mentioned in the first tutorial that the functionality of Eclipse can be extended. So today we'll be looking more into the extendability of Eclipse by installing the Google Web Toolkit plugin. This will allow us to actually do the programming in Google Web Toolkit using Eclipse. For that I will need several components. Or for the very least, the Google Web Toolkit plugin will consist out of several components. There's the actual plugin of Eclipse itself. There's the Google Web Toolkit Software Development Kit, or SDK. And there's a component called the Google App Engine, which is essentially a web container that allows your Google Web Toolkit projects to be deployed as a live application. So the first thing we need to do is actually download those components. Let's hope the internet's a bit cooperative today. Yes, it is. Let's go to the Google Web Toolkit website. So basically this is the Google Web Toolkit website, so I have to go to Downloads. And one of the first things I can download is the actual plugin and SDK. As a matter of fact, when downloading the plugin to Eclipse, it's actually all-in-one download. It's the actual plugin plus the SDK and the App Engine. However, in this case, I am going to download the plugin, the SDK and the App Engine separately. So first I'm going to go to the GWT SDK at the bottom of the page. I can press the download button to download the actual SDK. However, if you look at the bottom left corner of my screen, you will see that the current available download of the SDK is Google Web Toolkit 2.5.0 Release Candidate 2. Even though Google has done an excellent job in ensuring that all of their SDKs are backwards compatible, meaning you can always run the latest version and typically still use all your applications, I don't have a preference of using a release candidate. Instead, I prefer a stable version or the latest stable version. The reason for that is that in Google Web Toolkit projects you can also use third-party libraries to extend the functionality of your app. And those third-party libraries do not always stay on par with the latest SDK. So I want to download version 2.4 instead of 2.5, so you have to go to older version of the SDK, then scroll down and choose GWT 2.4.zip. I'm not going to download it right now because I've already downloaded it, so I can save everybody the trouble from having to watch me download something. Another reason why I want to download this SDK separately is even though the latest SDK comes along with the Google Web Toolkit plugin, whenever there's a new version of the plugin, generally the latest version of the SDK gets sent along with it, which then removes the old version of the SDK. Since I prefer not to switch of SDK version in the middle of a project, I rather install my SDK separately on my hard disk and then reference it from the Eclipse plugin, which I will demonstrate later, as opposed to just downloading everything in one package. And the same thing applies for the App Engine. As opposed to just downloading the App Engine along with the plugin, I prefer to install it separately so I know if I decide to use it. If I decide to use it and there's a new plugin version available, it doesn't get overwritten or removed. So in this case I gotta scroll all the way down, click download the SDK, after which I can download Google App Engine SDK for Java. And again, I'm not gonna let you watch me download something. I have the actual SDK over here already. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to unzip my software development kit, my SDK, so I can use it later in Eclipse. So for that I'm simply going to unzip the file, and in my case I'm going to deploy it under C development GWT SDK. Actually any folder will do. This is just how I like to organize my files. So let's just wait for the unzipping process to finish. Shouldn't be longer than a few seconds. Naturally, if it takes a while, this would be an ideal moment for me to sing a song, but honestly I'm not a very good singer. Plus I'm worried if I do start singing, a lot of people are going to switch off this tutorial. So it's better to just wait. 64% already. So yeah, even though I'm only installing GWT SDK 2.4, especially if you've done an older project with third-party components that are only supported up to a certain version, you can install multiple SDK versions in the same folder and later reference them from Eclipse, as I will show you. And we're done. Okay. Same thing for the Google App Engine. So again, I'm going to extract it under C, Development, Google App Engine in this case. And again, like I mentioned with the SDK just now, basically I can install multiple versions of the SDK next to each other in separate folders and reference the ones that I need from Eclipse later, as I will show you after the installation of the Eclipse plugin, which is the next step. Alright, so now we're done with the Google App Engine. I can actually close my software folder already, and I can close my browser as well. And I can start up my good old Eclipse. Actually, I shouldn't have closed my browser just now, and I'll show you why in a moment. Let's just wait for Eclipse to start up first. There we go, loading the workbench, which is essentially the workbench I created in the previous tutorial. So there we are again. And for those who have seen my first tutorial, this is the Hello World project we created in that tutorial. Okay, so if I want to install a plugin, I typically have to do that through a update site URL. And that was actually the thing I should have looked up in my browser just now, even though I just closed it. So again, I'm going to download and then download plugins and SDKs. Okay, the update site that I need, which is essentially a URL where Eclipse can download the necessary plugin from, is this URL that I'm highlighting right now. There's a different update site for every Eclipse version, one for Uno, Indigo, Helios. In this case, we'll be using 4.2 Uno because obviously I have Eclipse Uno installed. So I'm just going to copy this URL. So if I want to use this in Eclipse to install the plugin, I go to Help, Install New Software, and I copy the site URL in this bar over here, then press Enter. After which Eclipse starts to connect to this URL and see if there's any repository there that he can use. And there should be. Yes, as a matter of fact, he has found several components. Alternatively to using the Eclipse URL, I can actually use a pre-downloaded archive, which I will explain in a moment. As a matter of fact, the archive is over here. This will actually save me the trouble from having Eclipse to connect to the website and having to download all the components separately. This installing from an archive will go slightly faster, but doesn't have my preference. And while the installation is ongoing, I'll explain why. Okay, so the first thing I need to do after Eclipse has connected to the update website and scanned for all the components I can install is actually pick what I want to install. Okay, in this case I require the Google plugin for Eclipse and the GWT design for GPE, GWT Designer, which is like a graphical user interface for Google Web Toolkit. It's optional but recommended, so I will do it. I could also install the SDKs, meaning the Google App Engine SDK and Google Web Toolkit SDK. In this case I'm not going to, because I already just installed them manually. The only thing I have to do is reference them after the plugin is installed. As for the development tools, that's mostly related to Android integration. Since I'm not going to do anything with Android at this point in time, I'm just going to leave it for this. So I'm going to choose Next. Then it starts calculating the requirements and dependencies, which takes a while. So it gives me a good opportunity to explain why I'm doing it through this why I'm doing the installation through this update website and not through an archive. Even though an archive is faster, what Eclipse does is when it wants to update its plugins or scan for updates, is connect to all the update websites. When I'm connecting to an archive instead, which I might show at the end of the demo, I obviously will not get any updates. Next to that, for Eclipse to keep on working properly, it requires me to keep my archive in the same location on my hard disk. If I move it around, Eclipse will give me an error. Therefore, when possible, I try to use those update URLs, update website URLs. Okay, so so Eclipse has decided which components he's going to download and install. So I'm simply going to say Next and accept the terms of the license agreement. Then simply say Finish. After which he starts downloading and installing all the software. So towards the end of the installation, I am asked whether or not I want to install software that contains unsigned content. Well, naturally I want to, so I'm just going to press OK. So let's now just wait for the final steps of the installation to complete. And we're done. So right now we need to restart Eclipse for the changes to take effect. So I'm just going to say yes to that. And meanwhile I can close these windows as well. So let's just wait for Eclipse to restart for a moment. And we're back. So one thing you can obviously notice is that there is a blue G icon that has appeared here. This is actually the icon that hides all the functionality related to the Google Web Toolkit plugin. So we'll be using a few of those buttons in later tutorials. Another thing that can allow me to notice, that allows me to notice that the Google Web Toolkit plugin is installed, is the fact that I can, under File, New, Other, can suddenly create Google Web Toolkit projects or Google Web Application projects. We'll be doing more with that in the next tutorial. So as a last step, I need to reference the SDK of Google Web Toolkit and the Google App Engine to really complete the installation. So for that I have to go to Window, Preferences, after which a Google item has appeared here. So let's just open this item. First go to WebKit. Sorry, Web Toolkit. Then basically it allows me to add, remove, or download SDKs. So in this case I'm just gonna add a SDK and browse to the installation directory of the SDK, which was, as you might remember, under C, Development, GWT SDK, GWT 2.4.0. It picks 2.4.0 as a display name, so that's nice and convenient. So that's the SDK we'll be using. Then go to App Engine, also press Add, press Browse, go to the App Engine folder. So App Engine Java SDK 17.2.1. Okay. And finish the whole process by saying OK. So that's basically it. So let's just do one more check to see if everything is installed properly by just creating a simple project. So I'm going to File, New, Other. Go to Google Web Application Project, choose Next. Then as a project name we'll just say GWT Project 0, and for a package I guess I would say edu.example. I want to use Google Web Toolkit default SDK 2.4.0, and I want to use App Engine, well, this version. I want to generate some sample code. That's also fine. So now my project is built. I'll be discussing the contents of this project in the next tutorial. For easier programming, let me switch my Eclipse to my Java EE perspective, which is purely just a preference really. It doesn't really matter that much which perspective you use in this case. So let me just run this project. So it allows me to install one more additional feature. For that I'm going to choose right click, run as web application with the blue Google G. Okay, then when it's fully ready to, when it's ready to run, it will provide me with a URL that I can then use in my browser to access the project. So I'm just going to copy this URL, then open up my Google Chrome or Firefox or Internet Explorer, whichever you prefer. I prefer Google Chrome. Paste the URL and press enter. So the first thing that, and this will only happen the very first time when you try and run a Google Web Toolkit project, your browser will ask you to download the GWT developer plugin for your respective browser, in this case Chrome. Both Chrome, Firefox and IE have a plugin that needs to be installed to run Google Web Toolkit projects while developing. And why this is I will explain in my next tutorial, but for now let's just install the plugin. Okay, it's giving me a little error right now that I can only do this from, only install apps and user scripts from the App Store. Okay, let's see if this really is a problem. Yes, it is. Anyway, I do know the workaround for this. So the first thing I need to do is determine where this plugin actually went. Well, actually I don't have to. The thing that I need to do is I have to go to Settings. And this will only happen in Chrome actually. Go to Extensions and then simply install the plugin over here and add it. This is an extra security that they have built in the latest version of Chrome. As a matter of fact, it's installed already now. So let's just try and run the project once more. And there's our sample project already. Alright, so we'll continue on actual Google Web Toolkit projects in the next tutorial. I would like to... Well, my Chrome really is taking a while to shut down, but never mind. I would like to conclude this tutorial by doing something that was mentioned, that I mentioned earlier in this tutorial, which is showing you how to install from an archive. So again, I go to Help, Install New Software, and instead of providing a URL in this box, I'm going to say Add, and then press Archive, and then point to the actual archive file. After that, the procedure will be exactly the same. I'm not going to do that here because I don't want this archive file to be part of my update URL repository. Alright, so let's shut down Eclipse and say thank you all for watching, and see you at the next tutorial.